Hello my Egyptologists and curious viewers alike, welcome back to Bumblebee, and while my entrance was nowhere near as grand as hers always were, I am here to tell you guys all about the top 10 filthy secrets of Cleopatra that'll make you blush. Number 10 has to be the most famous myth of them all, it's Cleopatra's Gourd, which is an eloquent way to bring up the long-winded debate if Cleopatra really did make the first buzzing, well, you know. The answer is she did not. There was no such device ever found, no historic references to her having ever done such, and all the modern day stories lead back to one source, Brenda Love's 1992 book, The Encyclopedia of Unusual Adult Practices. Now, how she writes the passage in question, at least to me, reads more like an implication than any real confirmation. So here it is. Imagine Queen Cleopatra going about her own business in nature that surrounds her great palace. She spots a beehive and for some reason gets fascinated by the vibrations the bees make inside the hive. She orders some of her best engineers to make a small box/gourd in a way that lets the bees inside shake the walls to generate vibration. This device would also prevent the bees from escaping. What do you think, viewers? Does this sound like a confirmation or more of a prompt of readers' imagination? You can comment below. Anyways, Brenda cites no sources that allow the story to be traced back further. If Brenda was just trying to tease the idea of something like this occurring, or if she meant to imply it actually did, it's hard to tell, but now she's accidentally or intentionally created a folk tale well known around the world today. It is not true. But what ties nicely into that is number 9, the smear campaign. The reason it's so believable to us now that Cleopatra would design such a device is thanks to a massive campaign to tarnish her image funded by her enemies. Naturally, as a woman in ancient times, what's the easiest thing to go after that makes everyone hate you? Turns you from a saint into a sinner with one point of a finger. If you guessed witchcraft or promiscuity, you're right. However, in Cleo's case, it was the latter. Because of her influence on Roman men and very public sensual habits, Cleopatra was constantly vilified by poets and historians. A very nasty example is how Cleopatra was called the Midiocan in Greece, a term I cannot translate on YouTube because it's that kind of dirty, so if you Google it, no, I warned you. Propetus, a 1st century BCE poet, called her a woman worn by her attendants. Juvenal claimed she visited cat houses at night, painting her as a working girl. Cassius Dio, a 2nd century Roman historian, called her a woman of insatiable sensuality and insatiable avarice. A fascinating more recent example is the series of fake letters that circulated around modern Europe in the 16th and 18th centuries. These were allegedly found on bronze tablets in Cleopatra's tomb. Allegedly, because they weren't in Cleopatra's tomb, which has literally never been found. Anyways, in the letters, Mark is asking Dr. Soranus for help because his woman is asking for more than he can give, if you can catch my drift, and that was a huge scandal at the time. But I do gotta play devil's advocate. Number 8 is Cleo's dirty dealings. Part of the reason the campaign was able to stick was that Cleo did use her womanhood to dominate empires. The girl was smart and she knew men undermined her, so if they were going to objectify her, she was going to show them the only object she would be was the sword running through their back. Naturally, we can look at Caesar and the famous Cleo in a Carpet story as a prime example. She uses her youth and beauty and also being a literal genius to fold the man. Then there was Mark, who was enraptured by his first sightings of her, so much so that by the time they met, she knew she had him hooked with a look, and that's what's up, girl. But these were the men that Cleo ended up loving. History is marked by the times where she used tactics such as these against enemies or desired conquest without ever loving them. Octavian being one after Mark loses it at Atticum. However, he rejects her, as does the famous Herod the Grey. In that story, Herod, a client king of Rome, already resented Cleo because Antony had given Cleopatra so much of his land. This didn't stop her from having a criminal conversation with him, however. According to his historian Jophius, she laid a treacherous snare for him by aiming to obtain such adulterous conversation from him. However, upon the whole, she seemed overcome with love to him. Not that kind of love, by the way. Herod was confused why the hell his homie Mark's girl was throwing herself at him, to the point that he calls his homies, the council, to ask if he should kill her for her behavior. The boys were confused why that was Herod's go-to, so they awkwardly talked him out of that decision and said, hey dude, if you don't want any, maybe just ship her back home. So that's what Herod did. Number 7, we find out how Cleo inherited not just a kingdom, but dad's debt. Imagine that. Imagine being left the vast, beautiful empire of Egypt and all the lands it covers, and you're left with beautiful palaces and servants and luxuries and the equivalent of 17.5 million drachma drachmas of debt, and a famine that was killing the population. I nearly forgot the lawless uprising instigated by the soldiers the Romans had left behind in Egypt as a garrison. Yeah, great grad gift from Dad. In spite of such enormous dues, her immediate concerns as the apparent ruler of Egypt pertained to the domestic front because of an unexpected famine brought by the low levels of the Nile. As an astute financial advisor of her kingdom, Cleopatra eventually brought the combined wealth of tax revenues and foreign trade up to 12,000 talents a year, and the kingdom's wealth surpassed that of even some of her Ptolemaic predecessors. Caesar's request for partial repayment of the 17.5 million owed to Rome, which he now needed to pay for his own military expenditures, was met with response by Pothinus, whose reply was that it would be made later if Caesar would leave Alexandria. But who's ever believed that, yeah, no man, we're good for the rest, I'll just let you know when I have it later. Cleopatra initially sent emissaries to deal with Caesar, but then she catches wind of a rumor that Caesar was inclined to have affairs with royal women. So Cleo purchased a carpet, stripped, rolled up in it, and was on her way to Alexandria to see him personally. Number 6 is the famously fabulous Intimitable Livers. I have never loved a club name more. You can tell Cleo and Mark Antony were witty but fun intellect types to call a raunchy, promiscuous drinking club that. They also called the Society of Intimitable Livers. They lived the good life and, according to historians, engaged in endless debauchery and folly since they opened their proverbial doors in 41 BC. This was deemed Cleo and Mark's happiest times together as well, when the two would sneak out into the city in disguises like Jasmine and Aladdin to play pranks on citizens and pretend to live lives as everyday people. As a result of their more personal connection to the people, the group wasn't just wealthy folks. The club functioned as a "are you cool enough to get in" mystery. They feasted, played games, and partied on the outskirts of Alexandria, and historians argue it was likely a cult dedicated to Dionysus. They often staged lewd theatricals in which people danced and performed in their birthday suits while drinking. It was also a hub of conversation and education, allowing different calibers of people to mix and mingle and learn from one another. You undoubtedly had to be the right mix of fun, sensual, and intelligent to get in. Think you could have landed an invite? If not, don't worry. You're always cool enough to subscribe to The Hive for some more of the fun and fascinating history content. But before she was as number 1, Cleopatra was the other woman, number 5. When Cleopatra seduced Julius Caesar, she famously had herself smuggled in to see him by way of bed sack, a rug, or a bedroll, or more historically accurately, sat down in her best finery and had a metaphor-riddled conversation with the senior. She's said to have immediately captured him, however. At the time, Cleopatra was married to her brother and co-ruler Ptolemy the Bajillionth, I don't remember the number, and Caesar was on his third wife, Calpurnia. Obviously, they both weren't the biggest fans of these matches. After becoming involved with Cleopatra and escalating their affair, Mark Antony, unlike Caesar, straight up divorced his wife. Just left her high and dry. An Ethan Slater, Ariana Grande type of thing. Oh yeah, I went there. I went there so hard I had to Google who the hell Ethan Slater was. Anyways, Antony was famously married to Octavian's sister, and Hoby did not take it well at all. Not in a "yo, that's my sister" kind of way, more in a selfish, sleazy, "I'm upset I don't have a way to get handed the empire's throne" kind of way. This stupid little divorce is what eventually led to the events of the last battle of the Roman Republic. However, despite the chaos that their affair had caused, Cleopatra became proud of this. She often publicly boasted about her affairs and the success that came from them. And speaking of marriages, number 4 is how Cleo seemed determined to collect them all. Did you ever date someone as like a junior before you knew what dating was, but you never technically broke up? Would that mean you're still technically dating them now? I've had more than one friend bring up this point in conversation now that we're older, and it's quite the thing to laugh about together. However, if we do follow that logic, that means Cleopatra is married to multiple different dudes, like more than the fingers on one hand amount of different dudes. Don't get me wrong, I've done enough videos on Egypt where I explain divorce was super easy. All you have to say is that you're done and move out of the same house. But Cleo, who technically wasn't Egyptian, never even did that. Throughout her reign, Cleopatra also continued her marriages with 2 lovers who you know, under communicative and compromising relations. By maintaining these relationships, she could take advantage of the power they wielded. As a result, she received partial control over both men's armies. This also granted her access to their resources, which she used to fight against the Roman Republic. Number 3 is about one marriage she really did not enjoy. It's brotherly love. In 51 BCE, just before he died, Cleo's father designated her and her brother as co-regents to their younger brother because by Egyptian law, Cleo had to have a male co-ruler even as a regent. At the time of their marriage, Cleo used the fact that she was older and educated to quickly push aside her younger brother and the other younger brother, issuing administrative documents in her name and putting her likeness on the coinage. She also made decisions without the council, thus earning their bitterness. After 3 years of this, however, Ptolemy and the angry councilman forced Cleopatra into exile. She fled to Syria, where she seduced the Roman general Julius Caesar and persuaded him to recapture the Egyptian throne on her behalf. Ptolemy was then killed, and in order to reclaim Egypt, she marries the other brother, who holds the throne, and has Caesar killed. She then proceeds to poison that brother and also kill her sister Arsenio, who could have taken the throne. After that, Cleopatra co-ruled with her son by Julius Caesar, Caesarion. Because of this occurrence, Cleopatra is considered the sole female pharaoh that's part of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And speaking of, number 2 is Cleo's offspring. By getting rid of all her siblings, Cleo also secured her role on the throne as the sole heir and bloodline, until she gave birth to a legal successor to the throne later on. As we know, Cleopatra became romantically involved with Julius Caesar, but also Mark Antony, and reproduced with both. Here's the dirty details, however. None of her children's fathers were of royal lineage. All of her children were illegitimate due to their fathers' adoption clauses. This automatically causes them to be unqualified to take on the throne of Egypt after Cleopatra, that technically would not have entitled them to any of the royal benefits that came with pure bloodline. After the return of Mark Antony to Rome in 40 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to fraternal twins, named Alexander and Cleopatra Selene. After the death of their mother, these twins are moved to Rome to live with Octavian's sister. Years later, the two become involved in Roman Republic political affairs, but they become quickly lost to history. Caesarion is the eldest son of Cleopatra and the result of her affairs with Julius Caesar. He's known for being the last known sovereign entity of the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. When he was born, they expected him to rule after the passing of his mother. However, after the death of his mother, Octavian ordered his death. Last but never the least, number 1 is how Cleo used religious manipulative drama. Cleopatra saw herself as the goddess Isis from a very young age. This is understandable. Imagine hearing stories of how the gods lived. Little Cleo would be seeing the plentifulness and the grandeur and the beauty of the palaces she lived in as the equivalent of what was being described to her. Egyptian culture influenced the Macedonian girl and all of her studies consequently. As part of this identity, Cleopatra also consistently wore elaborate and elegant garments. She practiced swirling them in entrancing patterns, using scarves and golden adornments to flash and jingle as she moved. She believed that this would make her seem godly among the public. Cleopatra would also often show up with elaborate entrances, ones she even practiced beforehand. These entrances included giant curtain openings, long elegant dresses, and a selection of servants at her side to emphasize her importance and status. Sometimes they even donned costumes and regal garbs that made them seem as if minor gods accompanying the holy Isis herself. Each time, this caused her to become more and more the center of each room. Other ancient Egyptian texts also show that Cleopatra is the only member of her royal family to have learned Egyptian language, to have embraced it, the people, and the lifestyle all as her own. It's why she was one, if not the only effective Ptolemy ruler. Cleopatra often communicated with her subjects in their own language instead of using Greek. This, her dramatic flair, makeup, open sensuality, and impressive personality led the public to see her as a real goddess. Ultimately, it made them want to support and praise Cleopatra during her time as queen. Thank you once again for joining Bumblebee as we dive into history. I'm sure hope you enjoyed. Drop a comment down below on what your personal thoughts are on Cleopatra, as we love to hear them, and hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more of our rockin' content. Peace.